Hey everyone, I have an important update to share with you about some of your favorite characters from the Preston family series. And to help me explain it, I have invited special guest Crystal Shelley, editor at Rabbit with the Red Pen. Thanks for joining me, Crystal.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
So we worked together on my project, The Viscount Without Virtue, and you worked with me as the authenticity reader. For people who don't know, can you give them a quick rundown of what an authenticity reader is?
Sure. Yeah, so authenticity reading is commonly called sensitivity reading, which is, what a lot of your audience might know it as. So it's a service that evaluates how an identity or experience has been represented. It's often used when a writer doesn't have that identity or experience that they're writing about. And there are a lot of different topics that can be evaluated, including race or culture, gender, sexual orientation, disability. So just to give an example, if I were to write about a blind character, then I might hire a blind authenticity reader to evaluate how accurate or realistic my portrayal is. And just to put that out there, an authenticity reader doesn't seek to censor a writer or tell them what they can or can't write, which is a pretty big misconception about it. But instead, an authenticity reader provides feedback for the writer to consider, often to strengthen the characterization or the story.
Yeah, and as the author, I'm aware of my identities, which can be broken down a lot of different ways, but they include being white, cishet, American, 21st century. And I'm writing about characters who are in Britain, who are in the Regency period, who are different genders, races, sexuality than me. So I ideally would love to have someone from even Regency England give me an authenticity read. But since that's not possible, I try to prioritize what the modern readers might be connecting with in terms of identities and making sure that I'm not writing anything that won't ring true or be offensive to people. So for the Viscount Without Virtue, for example, the Zhou family had a growing subplot. They were first introduced in The Baron Without Blame, and they got bigger subplot in the Viscount Without Virtue. And so I wanted to make sure that this Chinese family got the appropriate representation and that I wasn't doing anything that either felt false or worse would be offensive. So when you are working with someone like me, how do you approach an authenticity read?
Yeah, so I'm usually hired to evaluate a specific topic that I have experience with. So in this case, I'm Chinese culture and representation. So really, I read a story based on my knowledge of that topic. And that includes, looking at whether the information is accurate to what I know, which isn't necessarily what everyone knows, but just based on my experience, whether what's being written seems realistic, whether it's stereotyped or harmful, and really whether it's effectively written for what the writer wants to accomplish. So in the back of my mind, as I'm reading, I'm always asking myself, what would a reader like me think about this portrayal? Would they feel seen or would they feel invalidated by it?
Yeah, and you gave me a lot of good feedback, including also ableist language, which I wasn't even aware that I had been slipping in. So that was really helpful. And
It's very common.
one of the biggest inauthenticities that you flagged for me is actually something that started in my prequel novella, The Baron Without Blame, which is that I spell the family name Zhou. So can you tell me what you saw or what your reaction was when you saw that?
Right. Yeah. So I want to preface this by just saying I'm not an expert on Chinese. It's not my first language. I have spoken Mandarin all my life, but I'm not exactly fluent in it. So I don't always know the nuances, especially when it comes to different dialects. But I am always mindful of Chinese names and the spellings of Chinese words in English because there is a lot of room for error. So I didn't think about their name really, I was just reading the story, but I didn't think about it until it was said that they were speaking Cantonese. And that was a cue for me to pause and look more into this because Chinese names are often spelled differently in English depending on the dialect of the speaker. So Zhou is a Pinyin spelling, and Pinyin is a 20th century romanization system that reflects Mandarin pronunciation. So I knew that Zhou was the representation of the character in Mandarin, and that same Chinese word that is represented by that last name is often spelled Chow in Cantonese. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that a Cantonese speaker doesn't have Zhou as a last name, but I think it's more likely that their last name would be spelled Chow if they are from, the Guangdong province, or, speak Cantonese as a first language.
Yeah. And so when you pointed this out to me, my first thought was that was vaguely aware of this because I had heard of like Peking versus Beijing, but I had not done any thought further than that, which is completely like, I was like, how did I not think about this as a writer, like just developing characters for The Baron Without Blame? How did I not stop and say, okay, what language did they speak? And what part are they from? So that was really bad writing on my part, and also bad just representation of people. And then as I had been developing them for The Viscount Without Virtue, I had decided that they came from a region where they would be speaking Cantonese, primarily because that's the only place that they would have been interacting with British people at the time. So I knew that they were Cantonese. And so I started to do a little bit of research, and I did not go very far into this. I think there's probably a lot of room for like dissertation level nuance, but the British didn't have a standard romanization or transliteration of Chinese to English until the 1850s. And when they did do that, it was based on Cantonese pronunciations. And then, like you said, in the 1950s, the People's Republic of China introduced the Pinyin system, which is more based on the Mandarin pronunciation. Mm-hmm. So thinking about my characters who came over in the 1780s, I decided to go with the Cantonese pronunciation and spelling because, first of all, there was no really standard spelling of English in the 1780s. That came in the 19th century. But I wanted to reflect that they are Cantonese and they would have held on to that Cantonese identity. And also the English were kind of going with this Cantonese transliteration. So this is the announcement. From here on out, the Zhou family is officially Chow, which I can't pronounce properly, but is something like so. So that's the official canon Preston family. They are the Chow family from here on out. I really appreciate you giving me your expertise as an authenticity reader, Crystal, and also joining us today to help me explain it to everybody. Yeah. If authors want to work with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so they can find me on my website, which is Rabbit with a Red Pen. So it's rabbitwitharedpen.com. There are details there about authenticity reading, like what it is, the specific service I provide, and the different topics I read for. I'm also on Twitter at Red Pen Rabbit, and I do talk about authenticity reading and some other topics like editing and conscious and inclusive language and things to keep in mind as writers. So yeah, I'm happy to connect either way.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.